All righty.
Okay.
So, welcome, Joe. Thank you for being here. We're going to share a little bit about your journey, and I want you to share as much as you feel comfortable with. There's going to be a lot of people that see this over the years since it is going on YouTube. And, the goal here is just to share your story a little bit, your experience with coaching, um, where you started, where you're at now after working together, and what your hopes are for the future. So, um, I want to just start off with, where were you at emotionally when we met? And so let me preface this. I guess we worked together for about 6 months. So
Correct.
this was kind of the end of last year. Um, and, I guess it doesn't matter. People are going to be watching this at any time. But um, during this time, we went through, preparing for holidays, new year, new insurance plans, tax refunds. So just to give a little bit of a perspective on some of the differences in your life and some of the things that happened. So where were you at emotionally when we met?
Well, let me go back a little bit farther than that. And
Okay.
about a year ago, I filed for divorce, and that was finalized in August of last year. So shortly thereafter, I looked up Dave Ramsey coaching for financial coaching. Um, my primary goal at the time was to get another set of eyes on my budget and say, does the budget make any sense? Am I on track? Am I off track? Am I missing big expenses? How does it look? Um, and um, so initially when we met, um, I was concerned about being able to meet the day-to-day bills, but thinking that um, my budget, because of the budget I had prepared for the divorce filing, indicated that I'd have about $1,000 a month extra cash flow. I just wasn't seeing it. And so I was like, okay, where's my math wrong? What am I doing wrong? Because I'm not seeing extra cash flow. Um, and so I was a case where I think I'm supposed to be okay, but I'm stressing.
Sure, sure.
um, and when we met initially, one of the first things you indicated was that um, you are very familiar with Dave Ramsey's program, but you don't follow it to the letter.
Mm.
Um, you believe it needs to be customized for the individual person. And one of the key areas is the peace of mind fund, as you're now calling it.
Yes.
And that $1,000 for that fund just is not enough to cover basic emergencies at this point.
Mm.
And at the time, I had nothing for a peace of mind or emergency fund. And my attempt at emergency fund was, I think I still have about $1,000 worth of room on a credit card.
Mm.
So I can cover an emergency if necessary, but it's with borrowing.
Right.
And um, so at the time I was stressed, but thinking that I was on the right track and doing okay and didn't really need to be stressed.
Mm-hmm.
But when we actually went through and put everything on paper for the first time and said, okay, how much money do you want to be putting aside for a new car? Because my car I'd just been told I needed to get a new transmission in my car, and that was going to cost 3 times the price of my car. I managed to get it hobbled together so that it works and doesn't need a new transmission. But at some point in the next few years, it's going to have to be replaced. It only has 190,000 miles on it now. It's probably on borrowed time.
Right. Right.
So at the time I said, yeah, I want to put about $300 a month aside for a new car. And went on down the list of various things that I want to put money aside for. And I think it came out to something close to twice my income was going out if I wanted to reserve money for all these things.
Mm-hmm.
Which explained why it is that although I felt like I should be fine, I wasn't. Because I had bigger wants than I had paycheck.
Sure.
Um,
And I think we all get to that point, right? I think there's I think we've all been there where it's only a couple bucks here, right? Or I can, yes, we can do that. We should be okay to put this aside. Or um, those little amounts, they really add up when we start putting them all down on paper.
Well, and part of it was I've had the same car for the last 10 years. It's time for a new one. Or, other things like that. Or I know that I'm going to be retiring in 15 to 20 years. I need to put money aside for retirement. None of the big wants were outlandish or expensive. It was just having not put money aside for life as it happens. It's all of a sudden an emergency to make up for the fact that I've had this car for 10 years and have nothing saved for the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe that's not quite an emergency, but I was feeling it at that point. And also thinking, I had this extra $1,000 a month coming in that I could put toward it
Sure.
until we realized that, no, I need to trim back pretty much all of the wants and put a token amount into a new car fund and car repair fund, and a token amount into entertainment and a token amount into some of the other categories to get used to putting something aside for them, but not an amount that would long-term meet the needs.
Mm-hmm.
I think we put $20 a month aside for a new car, and nobody's car is going to last long enough to pay 20 bucks a month to get a new one.
Right.
But it's to get in the habit of starting to put
Mhm.
money aside toward the goals.
Sure.
And I remember the first budget, looking at the bottom line and seeing that I thought we had cut everything we could cut, and it was still $400 or $500 over what I brought in. And the next month was similar. And then by the third month, I was able to identify some areas that I really didn't need to be spending as much as I thought I was. I don't remember what the categories were, but there were some areas where I'm like, I think gasoline was one where
Mm-hmm.
I had wanted $150 a month,
Mm.
and I found that I was only spending 75.
Sure.
And like that 75 can go towards something else.
Mhm.
And by January, also in November, I ended up getting COVID. And so I was out of work from one of my two jobs for about a month. And receiving one paycheck during that month from that job, and on FMLA from my other job. And in years past, that might have been considered an emergency. But I really didn't have to change anything in my budget to handle that lack of income.
Mhm.
And around that same time, I ended up getting the money back from the escrow, the lawyer's retainer for the divorce.
Mhm.
And I had assumed that that money goes directly toward paying off the credit card that funded the divorce. And you had other priorities with it. In particular, putting something aside for the emergency and peace of mind fund. And all of a sudden, over the course of a month or so, the peace of mind fund was, or the baby peace of mind fund was fully funded at the initial amount we had agreed that was a minimum we needed to have in there. It still needs to grow from that amount up to a reasonable 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses.
Sure.
But that at least covered, if I miss a paycheck, I'm okay.
Well, and you really started to identify priorities, right? So we talked a lot about some long-term goals, kind of what it is that working towards, and kind of reverse engineered it, kind of broke it down. And what do we need to take care of right now? What
Right.
is really the main priority right now? Because, and you mentioned it just a little blip there, but I want to make sure people know that you're working two jobs. And sometimes sometimes we can cut as much out of our budget as possible, but we still have to increase our income. And so sometimes some really hard decisions have to be made. And you made the decision, you work a full-time job and a part-time job to help make ends meet and help get the budget even above water, quite
Right.
honestly, for a while. Right. And so that's really important to mention that you did both second income and cutting expenses so you could change your cash flow each month, which is really important.
Well, and when we first met, I was doing the extra income as well. So it
Mhm.
didn't start during our time, but
Sure.
um, my wants and where I thought I should be spending money well exceeded both jobs' income.
Mm.
Um, and being able to look at one of the things you do is you look at each paycheck and see where is that money going.
Mm.
And I had for years I've budgeted based on monthly, and I've done paycheck budgets in the past. But my ex-wife, anytime she heard the word budget, her brain turned off.
Mm.
There was no conversation about budget. There was no, I'm going to stick to any kind of budget. If I gave her a $2,000 a month budget for groceries, she would find a way to exceed it. If I gave her a $50 a month allowance or budget for groceries, she probably would find a way to spend less than that.
Right.
She doesn't look at the price, and she just doesn't care about the budget. And somehow that has worked for her. It has added a huge amount of stress to my life, but she doesn't have any monetary stresses.
Mhm.
How and why, I don't know, but that's her
Right.
benefit.
Right.
But so I've been working the two jobs for about 18 months now.
Mhm.
And when we first met, as I said, my expected expenses far exceeded the income.
Mhm.
But then there was one-off events of income that came in. For example, the money that came in for the retainer,
Mhm.
that was money that was expected to come in at some point, but it took far longer than I had expected for that to actually happen.
Sure.
So I think that was probably November or December when that finally came in.
Mhm.
And then early February, got tax refund. And those two big events really helped to change the budget.
Mhm.
The first one, the money went almost entirely to the Peace of Mind Fund, and getting that funded to the point I didn't need to worry about it anymore for now.
Sure. Mhm.
Um, and the second big event, when that happened, the money went toward paying off a 401k loan that I had, and the credit card that I'd used to fund the divorce.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden, that increased income effectively about $200 a month, without having to work extra for it.
Right. Well,
Um,
and through this process, because sometimes I think people say, "Oh, well, those were big wins. Where would you be without those?" And I would like to, and I say this quite often that when we start, I believe in putting it out there, right? Putting it out into the universe. When you start making a plan and you get more comfortable with your plan, right? And you know that if a larger unexpected sum of money comes in, you've got your plan in place already, so you know how you want to apply it.
right.
And so there's no question when it comes in where, I don't know about you, but I've definitely in the past been getting a tax refund. I'm going to buy a TV and I need to get this fixed and I'm going to pay this bill off and I'm going to do all of these things. Well, my refund's $1,000 and I've just spent $4,000 in my head, right? Of all these things that I wanted to do. And so knowing that you've got a plan in place when these larger sums of money come in, it's relatively easy to see, okay, what is the area that I'm working on right now? What's
Right.
really important? What do I need to take care of? Another thing that I want to bring up really quick, if you don't mind sharing, because one thing in the beginning that I might say you were a little bit hesitant to do, was putting together an entertainment budget. You kind of, you know, and I don't make anybody do anything, but I highly encourage you to have an entertainment budget because you just never know. And so would you share a little bit of what happened with that entertainment budget and the other things there's two or three
Right.
events that go along with that.
Well, an entertainment budget to me is frivolous. And at this point, I can't afford much in the way of entertainment. So we agreed on a $20 a month budget amount just to put in there so that there would be something. And just, I think it was last month, there were two things, one minor, one much more significant, where the more significant one was my son asked me to go skiing with him on a Sunday, and my initial reaction was, I can't afford that. But I had actually worked an extra, I think 20 hours that week beyond what I normally would. And I looked in the entertainment folder, and there's $80 sitting in there. Now, given that's over the course of 5 months, so clearly I didn't spend $20 a month on entertainment. But I was like, half of it is paid just with the entertainment fund because it certainly qualifies as entertainment. And the other 20 hours will more than cover the extra expense for it. So I could go enjoy skiing without worrying about it.
Sure. And creating those memories with your son and really spending that quality time for something that wasn't necessarily planned. Right. And looking back on it, would you share maybe the 20 hours you could have picked up and it would have covered it to begin with? So let's just go there. Maybe you didn't have an entertainment budget. Would you share with me I guess let me think about how I want to ask this.
I had lots of other places I wanted to spend that extra 20 hours worth of money. Just like you said, with the tax refund of $1,000, you spend 4,000 of it in your head. Same thing with the extra 20 hours of work. I was spending that extra money in probably 10 times over. I'd like to do this, I'd like to do that. Want to do some home issues with the house or want to do whatever. And by then being able to go skiing, that just cemented it and said, okay, this is what I'm doing with the money. And don't have to worry about it.
Sure.
I know where the rest of it goes, which debt it goes to pay off. And I'm not stressing over, how am I going to spend that extra money, or how am I going to come up with the money for skiing?
Sure.
And then the other minor thing that happened is my son also asked for Disney Plus. And I'm like, that eats up half my entertainment budget, but it's only half of it. And I haven't spent it on anything else. So if I spend that half of the entertainment budget on Disney Plus for the next year, I'll still have money to go skiing again with him next year.
Sure. Sure.
So it's freed me up to be able to enjoy life a little bit more and be more intentional about some of those expenses and recognizing that, I've put money aside for this purpose. It's okay to spend it for that purpose.
Yes. Yes. I love that. Giving yourself permission to spend money in the areas that are important to you.
Well, and in areas that I've already decided to spend money on. Because a decision and permission are not the same event in my mind. The decision to do it comes well in advance of the actual permission to spend that money on this event.
Well, the decision comes when you decide what's important, right? When you're writing your budget, deciding, what this is, because that's really what you're doing is you're deciding what's important for you. right? And so, yes, so you're making that decision. This is what's important. And then you're giving yourself permission to spend it because you've already said it's important to you.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, in this period of time too, the, 6 or 7 months, you've increased your net worth.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And paid off some debt, changed your cash flow. Overall, would you say, and I know we can never say, yes, I'd be in the same spot, but do you think you would have made maybe some of the same decisions, or do you feel like coaching was worth it? Did it allow you an opportunity to learn and to go through different options and look at different areas that maybe you wouldn't have explored had you not gone through coaching?
The question of whether coaching is worth it is always a long-term question in my mind.
Mm.
It really matters more 2 years from now than how I feel now.
Mm.
And how much of what I've learned am I still implementing in a couple of years?
Mhm.
So it's hard to say, yes, it's worth it this time, or no, it's not. But when I look back at individual transactions and realistically where I would have been without the coaching versus with the coaching, I don't think I would be any better financially without having paid for coaching.
Mm.
So I think that it has at least paid for itself. How much more than that, I don't know.
Mhm.
But I think that it has at least paid for itself just in this first few months.
Sure. Do you feel like you learned some skills and gained some tools, and maybe some questions, some kind of the process to go through when you're looking at making decisions? Do you think those will carry you on long term? Or do you think that what you learned was very short term stuff?
I think the key component that will carry on long term is to be intentional about making the decisions, and don't just carry money over from month to month and say, okay, I'm going to have $100 gas bill every month just because that's what you put in the budget 6 months ago and you don't have a clue whether you spend it or not.
Sure.
But just because you made a decision 6 months ago doesn't mean that that's the right amount today.
Mhm.
And reevaluate it all the time and say, is $100 enough still, or is it still too much?
Mhm.
And given where I expect gas prices to go in the next month, is it enough?
Right.
Or maybe I've got reason to believe that gas prices are going down in the next month, depending on when people are watching this video.
Right. Right.
So,
Mhm.
maybe what was enough 1 month is not nearly enough the next month, or maybe it's now way too much.
Sure.
And one of the big issues that I had going into this was I had no idea what to budget for utilities.
Mm.
I moved into a new place in June and had no experience of what is a winter like in this place. The building that was here before had burned down and was replaced. And so, there was no comp to compare it to try to say, here's what you can expect for electric or gas.
Sure.
So I've been pleasantly surprised. Um,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
but I had no idea, and I needed to leave room in the budget for what I thought was a worst case scenario of, and that turned out to be well in excess of what reality was. Um,
Mhm.
but coming into the winter months, I was cautious about carrying over the previous month's utility bills because like they may be 4 or 5 times that much. I don't know what it's
Right.
going to be. Um,
Right.
and really throughout most of the winter, I was concerned about that because, you know, I don't know, is December going to be much colder than November was? And
Right.
are the bills going to be
Well,
significantly worse?
right.
But now that I've got this information in the background, next year I can budget much more closely and
Mhm.
have an expectation of what to expect for the bills. Um,
Sure. And also allowing yourself to be, for it to be flexible, right?
yeah,
Because budgets are very fluid and they are flexible. And sometimes when we're moving, you know, going from a bigger house to smaller or smaller to larger, moving cities, all of that changes. And so, that's a good point to mention that, you can have an idea, throw a number out there, because that's really all you can do is just throw a number out and err on the side, hopefully, of being higher, right? It's easier to budget
Right.
more than budget less. But, that's a really good point to make, that budgets are just fluid, and we have to be flexible, and we have to allow ourselves the opportunity to learn to use the information, when we're tracking and when we're closing out and we're writing that next month, to do the best we can with the knowledge that we've got.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there's still one area in the budget that is going to take a while for me to learn properly. That's the whole
Sure.
food area.
Right.
Because my actual spending and what I believe I'm spending are two wildly different things.
Mhm.
And I have a rough time believing that I can spend as much as seems to come out of the envelope.
Mhm.
And like, there should be a lot more left in the envelope at the end of the month than what I'm seeing.
Right. Right. Well, we've talked, that could be due to a lot of things, right? Prices of groceries are continually going up. So you can buy the same thing this month that you bought last month, and you're just naturally going to spend more because of inflation
Right.
and, price increases. Part of it is, like you said, just taking some time to plan, what are your shopping habits? Are there things, are we doing some impulse buys in our grocery shopping? If we're not planning, we might have a pantry full of food and still really nothing to eat, not much to
Exactly.
throw together, right? So, I think that that's all part of it. And that's an area that you learn what is working and what isn't working, right? And
Right.
you have, again, the tools to use going forward. And you can also adjust your grocery budget. You know, I don't
I can
I don't
adjust the
like to
budget,
just
but there's an amount that I think I want to be spending.
Mhm,
And I don't want to have the budget be higher than what I think I should be spending,
mm,
because it's
mhm,
making a decision that, yes, you're going to overspend. And like, no, that's not what I want. But
sure.
I have found that if I do the menu planning and stick to the plan, then the budgeted amount is more than adequate.
Mhm,
It's when there's impulse buys or um, making meals on impulse that
mm,
suddenly something that was purchased for a particular meal ends up filling up the pantry. And so,
right.
yes, the pantry ends up being full, but not of any one or any collection of things that makes a meal. You're
Right,
always shy
right,
something. Um, and
right.
um, so I guess my next step, I guess, is to occasionally menu plan, starting with what's in the
Mhm,
pantry, um,
mhm.
and go from there and say, okay, what else do I need in order to use this 20 pounds of beans?
Sure.
My parents gave
Well,
me
and
about 20 pounds of beans, and
wow.
I'm still
Mhm.
struggling to find use for them.
Well,
Yeah.
I could probably send you some ideas. And that's it too, challenge yourself,
Right.
right? We have the opportunity to challenge ourselves each month in an area. Maybe it is to spend a little bit less. Maybe it is to do something different. Maybe it is creating a new habit. So how do we create the space to make that new habit possible, right? And you know, putting a meal idea down once a day, walking past the fridge and just having a list up there and just writing down what sounds good, and you keep track of that. And so you're continually, after several months, right, 2 3 months, you've got a whole list of possible meals that you can just pick from,
Right.
right? And they become kind of the staples and make grocery shopping and meal planning much simpler going forward.
And less expensive too, because you're not buying one-off things all the time.
Mm-hmm. Sure,
So,
sure.
and
Joe,
yeah,
what fears? Oh,
um,
go ahead.
part of the whole budgeting thing is also giving yourself permission to spend more on some areas too.
Mm-hmm.
It's not always cut. Sometimes it's, you're not spending enough in this area. You need to spend a little bit more, like entertainment, because you need to have the freedom to go to a movie couple times a year, or, whatever it is.
Sure.
You need to have freedom to have a life. It's not just survival.
Yes.
And to your question about what fears do I have going forward,
Mhm.
I think my biggest fear is a gradual reverting back to old habits. And I'm not worried about tomorrow. It's a year from now. Is my behavior
Mhm.
still what it should be? Am I still budgeting on a per paycheck basis? Am I still looking ahead to make sure that I do have the money in the account for every bill that comes up when it's due? That's the thing that I've loved about the per paycheck budgeting is if you've got a bill, I've got alimony that I pay, and that typically comes out middle of the month. Well, that could be paid for by the first paycheck of the month, or it could be paid for by the last paycheck of the month. And regardless of which one pays for it or is closest to it, am I going to have enough money to pay that? And am I going to have enough money to live? Well, if I've got a budget that's per paycheck, then I recognize that some of the money from this paycheck has to roll over to next paycheck.
Mhm.
And some of the bills that I could pay this paycheck can be paid out of next paycheck too.
Sure.
And I can make the adjustments necessary to make it so that I don't have to worry about, I don't have enough money at this moment to make my expenses.
Sure. Sure. Let
By
me go
looking ahead,
back
I
to
can avoid
something
that.
that yeah, let me go back to something that you said a minute ago. And you said, one of your fears is maybe long term, right? In a year or 2 years, maybe reverting back to some old habits. Why do you think that might happen?
Um, I think a lot of my old habits are based on inertia, and it's
Mhm.
easier to sit still than to move, um,
Mm,
or keep in the same path that you've been in. Um, and so I suspect that um, the new habits, there may be a tendency from the old habits to pull back into gradually losing one at a
mhm.
time or whatever, and just gradually go back into old habits. Um,
Sure. So what can you put in place now to maybe prevent that from happening?
the main thing I can do is strengthen the new habits and
Mm,
strengthen, remember why it is that I like things like the um,
mhm.
paycheck budgeting. Um, remember why that's beneficial over um, really any other type of budgeting. Um, because when you know when
Sure.
your income's coming in and you know where that income has to go, um, you make better decisions
Mhm.
before the month begins, or at least before you get that paycheck, um,
Sure.
and it alleviates a lot of stress. Um, but I think that in order to enforce the new habits, um, part of it is just continuing to practice them, and part of it is reminding myself the benefits of them.
Mhm. And what did you have to do to get to this point of, right? That
Right.
that sitting still and keeping your head buried in the sand, it didn't necessarily allow you to get to this point. You had to take some type of action, right? And
Right.
so just reminding ourselves of what action I had to take to get here. And so if I want to go further, then I need to build on those actions,
Right. Yeah, I've
right?
still got longer term goals that are not addressed yet. Um,
Sure.
I want to have that emergency and peace of mind fund fully funded. Um,
Hmm.
and the baby fund is not a fully funded fund.
Sure.
Um,
No.
it's just to cover minor things that might come up um, for now. Um, but it's to have something.
Yeah.
And, um, I understand that in today's economy, jobs are easy to come by. But I've also heard from some friends that they've been looking for a job for several months and haven't found something. Um,
Mm,
so even in an economy where you've got employers out hunting for people, um, your particular skill set might not be in high demand the moment you need it to be. Um,
sure.
so, having a more funded peace of mind fund um, allows you the flexibility of maybe making a move on your own when you don't have to wait for somebody else to release you to the market. You can
Mm,
release the company to the market.
Sure, sure. Yeah,
And
and just knowing that you planned and knowing that should something happen with a job, right? That you've got some money to fall back on. Even
right,
if you had to take a less paying job for a period of time and you needed to pull from your your 6 month
it makes it an option.
fund,
Yeah,
right? It allows again a little bit more peace, right?
right,
And a little bit more security and a little bit more flexibility and takes a little bit of the pressure off, which is so often what we need. And that's where we start to, kind of put our hands up and like, yeah, I don't know what to do when we start to freeze when the pressure really gets put on
right.
us. So if we can alleviate some of that pressure, then going forward.
And
So
then, as I said before, there's still the new car fund that needs
mhm,
to be enhanced.
sure.
At this point, there's not much you can get for a few $100s.
Mhm.
And
Not much.
um, also the retirement fund needs to be enhanced,
Mhm.
because um, I've got roughly 15 years before I reach retirement age, and I need to renew the goal that I had as a teenager, of retiring at 35, and say, okay, 35 has ended, but I still have about that many years. So
Yeah.
it's time to kick back into gear and tackle that
Sure.
goal, like I had as a kid.
Sure. And you'll be able to do it with just changing some of your cash flow, right? Because you
Right,
know what it is that you're working towards. And so it's more of a possibility now than it was before.
absolutely. Um,
Awesome.
and by paying off the credit card, by paying off the 401k loan, um, that puts a lot more money toward um, either of those objectives.
Sure. Sure. Awesome. Joe, any last thoughts? Anything else that you want to share?
It's certainly been a pleasure working with you.
Hmm.
I appreciate the time that you've invested in me and helping me on the financial side, and also along the way, the life coaching that you throw into the mix too.
Hmm.
It's not all dollars and cents. Your focus is more on how the dollars and cents relate to life and allow you to live, as opposed to just how do you make the math work. And I appreciate
Wow.
that.
Well, I appreciate you, and don't forget that. I appreciate that, and I bring it in because I think that we need to be reminded of it. And I think I tell everybody, and I'm sure I told you that, I don't believe that anybody needs a coach to be able to write a budget. I think there are enough tools out there to be able to write a budget. Quite frankly, even to get some debt paid off, put some money in savings. I don't think you need to work with somebody to do that. But for it to be long term, for us to recognize our relationship with money and what's holding us back, and to look at things, give us different options and that accountability, that's where it's really powerful. And until we break through some of those limiting beliefs and some of our money mindsets, right, and we start
Right.
working on, okay, why is this important to me, that's where the real change happens. And I love it when clients, when people pay off debt and change their cash flow and start saving. I absolutely love that part. But I that's secondary to our mindset changes and the habits
Right.
that we start to build. And so thank you, and recognize too that you should be very proud of yourself for all the progress and all the change and all the hard work, because it's not easy, right? No part of this is easy, and you've put in the work, and it's because of your work that you are where you are. So
Well, thank you.
awesome. Thank you very much. It's definitely been great working with you, and it doesn't end here. But um, thank you for coming on and sharing all of this with everybody. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
Bye.